What's going on? What's up? What's up? How you doing? It's your girl Ink Well J, Ink Very Well, because I don't just ink well, I ink very well. So today is a little bit different than other days. Me and the sun we've been dancing today because I had an earlier show with DJ Show, and I had to move the camera several times because me and the sun are having a little bit of a dance, but it's fine. The sun will always win. Um, okay, so it's interesting because today's show is going to be a little different. I had just stitched someone's TikTok yesterday, and you know what? I'll actually pull up the original TikTok. I'll send the link to myself, so give me a second to do that. But I stitched someone's TikTok the other day, and that video got a bunch of views. And in that video, I'm discussing just a little bit about my experience as a therapist for children with autism, and wondering like where were all of my black clients? Where were any black clients on any of our client lists? Because we hadn't had any in our office, and how that kind of led to some of the work and advocacy work that I do in the community. Because not only do I work with organizations that they don't just do mental health awareness, but they might do things like domestic violence, relocating families. I work with organizations that do stuff like that. But in the world, sometimes I meet parents. What's up? In the world, sometimes I meet parents that need advocacy for their children, and it can be hard to get that kind of advocacy in the community, especially for Black parents with children who are Black and are looking for some kind of advocacy, whether it may be like a one-on-one in class, or just how do I navigate this whole parenting thing for my child, where I can advocate in a way where they get all of the services that they need, but at the same time, they don't feel left out or behind. They don't feel like they're being misdiagnosed or mistreated, which is a thing that absolutely happens to a lot of our Black children getting diagnosed. Even in the video that I posted, which I'm going to show the original and then I'll even show the stitch. Um, it, you know, it's like in the comments of my video, people are even mentioning the other diagnoses that Black children are given as opposed to what later is found to be autism. So I thought it would be really cool to just have a little chat as a person who was a late diagnosed autistic. To just, yeah, let's have a chat about that. Let's have a chat about that. So, okay, if you happen to tap into the chat, I can see it, and you can leave the comments, and I'll comment back to you from whatever platform you're watching. So this was the original video. Let me pause it. Okay. Gonna pause that. I'm gonna return to y'all because you all are who I'm looking for. All right, and let's do a share screen. I love everybody that watches and is like super patient because it be taking a minute. It be taking a little minute. Okay. This is the video. Let me mute the music over here. Mute. All right. Y'all can see that, right? Here's the original video that I stitched.
This, the people that do this, the hood dudes that randomly just start screaming out lyrics, they are undiagnosed ADHD or autistic. Or the ones you see like twisting their hair while walking down the street, yelling lyrics or playing music in one ear. You know what I mean? Like yelling out lyrics, like living in just their own world. Undiagnosed autistic. For the love of God, it looks different in Black people, especially like. Cannot emphasize how important music is to Black neurodivergent people, because a lot of us struggle with expressing ourselves because one, we weren't taught. Two, because we're autistic, it's like words are out of your reach in a lot of ways, and then when you find music that makes you feel certain ways, you consistently recite those lyrics to like refresh that feeling in you, and also to kind of like itch that scratch when you just want to say lyrics out loud. Music is important to Black neurodivergent people. But yes, I was gonna stitch this video. I'll tag the original.
Okay, so that's that. And then I stitched that video here. I'm not sure why it's not playing loudly.
For an organization that
There we go.
assists families who have children diagnosed with autism.
It's the hood dudes that randomly just start screaming out lyrics. They are undiagnosed ADHD or autistic.
I'm so glad I went through my drafts because I forgot that I put this in my drafts. This is a real fucking thing. I remember I was working for an organization that assists families who have children diagnosed with autism, and I worked with them for like 2 years. And I really loved it. It was actually where I discovered that I was autistic, even though I wouldn't go on to get a diagnosis for another 10 years because racism. But yeah, so in the middle of like year one, going into year two, I remember like looking at my client list and being like, why don't I have any black kids? After a year of working in the field, I'm looking at these behaviors of all these non-black kids, and I'm like, these are absolutely things that black kids do, have done, have gotten penalized for, suspended for, arrested for. I had classmates with tantruming behaviors and things like that, full on sensory meltdowns. And I really was like, where are all the black kids on my client list?
I'm muted. Sorry. I've been muted for several moments. Okay, my bad. Okay, so here are some of the questions after I posted that video. Here are some of the questions that were asked. So one question was okay. So one of the questions that I was asked was, what are some signs that you saw in yourself? Um, so like I said, I had a pretty interesting childhood. And there was so much complex trauma that the PTSD diagnosis seemed easy. The anxiety and depression diagnosis, those were really easy. And once I received those diagnoses, having them for some reasons, things were still really difficult. I didn't understand why things were so difficult for me. And I had to take a second in my own life and go all the way back to my childhood and ask myself, have things only been difficult now in adulthood, or have they always been difficult and I've been hiding how difficult it has been for me and how much help I actually need? And yeah, that's actually what it is that things have always been difficult for me. Always. I was just really, 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 really good at pretending that things weren't hard. Um, and a lot of Black women experience that. A lot of Black women experience having to figure it out. Like I've spoken to so many Black women who said, I just had to kind of figure it out. And sure, our lives are easy enough that we can, or not easy, our lives aren't easy enough where we can figure things out easily. We have to figure them out in a way that requires some kind of work. But a lot of a lot of the work that we've done to figure things out have been traumatic. That's all the things I keep thinking. I'm like, yeah, but there's some trauma there. Like you were ignored, or you were not supported in the way that you think you were supported, because you should not have been so independent so young. And because Black girls are so independent often at such a young age, autism diagnosis doesn't happen until a lot later. A lot of Black women being diagnosed at 30. So in the description wherever you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, it's in the description. If you're watching on Facebook, it's in the description. I put a bunch of links that I'm referring to, and since we're talking about Black women, one of those links is in there, and I'm going to list some of the often missed traits that are like missed a lot for women, especially Black women. So this is on Open Doors Therapy website. So number one, autism can look like social anxiety or shyness. I can attest to being super shy as a child, but once I felt comfortable enough, which is another way of saying once I unmasked, I would be the life of the party. But a lot of me being the life of the party is people just letting me stim for either their own entertainment or because they're not judging me. So I felt comfortable enough to do whatever thing I was doing that was my own thing. Um, as far as like social anxiety and shyness, yeah, I was 1,000% anxious in every social situation that I entered, which I knew at a very young age, but I thought that it was normal to be that anxious going into social situations. And I always thought, well, at some point I'll stop being anxious. I just got to figure out, I just have to learn how to do it how everybody else is doing it. um, and my sister can even attest to this. She helped me make most of my friends in elementary school, like literally walking me up to people and saying, "This is my sister. Do you want to be her friend?" Because otherwise, I would just be sitting off to the side, minding my business. I'll find something else to do to entertain myself. But otherwise, I was just be chilling to myself. And I remember my sister all the way up until like middle school, just kind of being like, "Hey, go make friends, go make friends." um Another thing about being shy is because I was encouraged so much to make friends, I didn't actually like I always looked at other friendships as happening really organically. I thought everybody kind of just they looked like they were just forming together, like they'd already known each other before or whatever. So for me, I always was in a position of having to awkwardly walk up to someone and make a friend group. So it always felt awkward and uncomfortable. But at a certain point, after years of like longevity in certain spaces, I was still very awkward. I was still very uncomfortable and I still felt very shy. And the thing that I would do to turn it on is literally just throw on a mask. Um, the second thing, which literally it leads me to the second list on Open Doors Therapy website, girls and women with autism tend to mask their autistic traits. 1000%. We mask. Outside of feeling awkward in social situations, like women have another layer that when we think of the autism diagnosis typically looking traditionally looking like, well, statistically being 30% looking like white boys, 30% more likely to be white boys, uh, girls and women have another layer to overcome in our awkwardness and masking and navigating social circles. It's like not only do I have to navigate this space in a socially appropriate way, but I also have to navigate womanhood. Like I have to navigate being ladylike. And that for me was super hard because a lot of womanhood requires masking. Like a lot of things that are considered traditionally women like or womanly or like ladylike are overwhelming as shit. Like there are things I like to do. Like I love having a weave in because I don't have to worry about my hair. I love having lashes because if I like I love feeling pretty, and so I love my lashes to be done, but if they're on for a longer amount of time it's less work for me. So those things can happen like across the board, but not all autistic people find a thing that works for them. A lot of autistics struggle with feeling like I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. I'm not girly enough. I'm doing something wrong. I'm not womanly enough. I'm doing something wrong. Like I just when especially when we get to our late 20s and 30s, I'm doing something wrong. I have to be doing something wrong because I'm just not doing it in this way and I feel uncomfortable. And even with my mask, things are still not working out in the way that they were supposed to work in other spaces because the masks are not who we truly are. Um, and they're usually really harmful and exhausting and super toxic because not everyone else is extending the same amount of energy and grace and politeness to us when we enter spaces. So it also feels like we're doing a whole bunch of work, a whole lot more work. Number three, girls are expected to be polite and have good manners. So yeah, that's a thing. Number four, which will bring me to a lot of things that we talk about later. I hope I have time for, but bullying may cause other diagnoses like depression. So you may find a lot of autistic women are also they also struggle with depression and anxiety. Women experience a lot of violence, micro and macro aggressions, and it happens from everyone including other women, which is like its own internalized misogyny that we have to also navigate. And so we are getting bullied everywhere. We're getting bullied from all sides. And y'all might notice me like kind of doing things with my hands because I'm trying to be as present as I can for y'all. But it requires me to look at myself. And while I'm comfortable with looking at myself, being unmasked for what could be however many strangers is really scary. Because even in me being honest on TikTok, and I know I'm fine and I'm okay, like even in me being honest in that experience on TikTok, I've still gotten a lot of hateful comments from people who don't understand that the reason why a lot of Black children go underdiagnosed is because of racism. Like I can list all of, earlier today as I was preparing for the show, I'm listing out all of the reasons, and literally the first one I listed was racism. But when I'm listing out all of the reasons, they all point back to racism. So we'll get to that. But yeah, bullying may cause other diagnoses like depression. Autistic people in general can experience depression more likely than others. But autistic women also experienced depression. And that's why I was saying in the very beginning, like I knew because of the amount of complex trauma that I experienced, I knew that I was obviously anxious. I knew I had depression and some kind of complex PTSD. I didn't even know that complex PTSD was a thing before I even got diagnosed. I didn't know there was like an actual word for what I had. I just knew that I had gone through so many different types of trauma that it was stacked on top of me. When I did, as I've been, and then when I started doing all the work on all of those type of traumas, and bullying is included in there was still something that was missing about how I was receiving treatment, and even how I was treating myself, even how I was choosing to live. Something wasn't right. I was like, okay, I'm doing the things that are supposed to help anxiety, and I'm doing the things that are supposed to help depression, but something's still not right, right? And so that made me start pushing a little bit harder on my therapists to evaluate me for autism, because as I've started doing the work in living a life unmasked and giving the grace that I extend to not only other people but especially to neurodivergent people, I'm thriving differently in a far better way. My consistency is far better. Um, and this is all super recent, which is why, again, it is also so uncomfortable because people have seen me in a certain way for so long. They have so many expectations of me that as I'm showing up as myself, I can feel people's disappointment. I can see it. I like, I don't know what to do about it, but I notice it. And the only thing that I can accept is I have to be me. I have to be my fullest and truest self. And if you love me, that means that you love my fullest and truest self. So, those are, we wanted to start with the signs and things. So though, yeah, that's that. Yeah. All right. Y'all are getting to see me for real, for real. Now let's get into statistics, because everyone in they're the people who are like the most hateful. I don't know why I had to remember those, but because there were also a lot of really, really great comments. The people who are most hateful needed like statistical evidence. Like they were like, oh, you don't have any statistical evidence. I always had statistical evidence. I just didn't feel like I needed to prove it. But since I'm doing a YouTube video, I feel like it's necessary that you all have statistical evidence that supports that racism is the reason why Black children go underdiagnosed. So, let's start with an easy one first. I feel like, because there are 2 or 3 articles that I listed in the comments that you have to download the PDF for, which I really hope you do, because they're really detailed research that they've done on studies for children in 5th grade. And I think they did another one for children in middle school, I think, and then there was another one done for late diagnosis adults. So, but let's start with an article. All right. So, nope. Where's the NPR one? Okay, here we go. So let's start with this NPR article, which is the first link in my description for anyone that's watching. It's titled "Black and Latino Children Are Often Overlooked When It Comes to Autism." All right. The TikTok that I showed you in the beginning, I did a follow-up video. And in the follow-up video, I'm discussing how after working in the autism field for about a year and a half, I was very curious as to why I had no Black clients. And I felt like the solution to this struggle for me, it was, I need to move closer to where the hood is. Let me get into the hood, and then maybe my client list will change, and I can, bridge a gap between what I want to do in life and what I'm doing now. And at the time I was doing that particular work, and I wanted to bridge a gap toward doing more community work for underserved Black families. So I'm working in this field for like this new office for like 6 months or so. Still no Black kids, but I have this one family, and um of the two children, the eldest was diagnosed with autism, and I found that he experienced way more negative feedback from teachers than anyone else on my client list, because he was also a little bit older, uh, like fourth or fifth grade, and everyone else was like either really really young or like an adult. So he would get a lot of negative feedback from teachers, a lot of calls from the office, all kinds of things, and I just kept feeling like, one, I've never had this many calls on a kid, like one of my client lists so far. Typically, if I get a call, it's like a tantrum, or maybe someone forgot to bring lunch to our kiddo. Maybe our kiddo forgot their lunch, things like that. Like, it was never really anything like as many calls as this one kiddo got. And every time I would go pick them up, they were totally pleasant. Every time I would go to pick him up, he was totally pleasant. But the story that would be told to me, it would always sound like, okay, sensory overload. Like, and I'd be like, who else is on this campus to help this kid out? Like, I don't mind being the one you call, but like, no one else knows what they're doing here. And I just felt like, one, that's a disservice to the mom, that's a disservice to the child, and it's a disservice to the relationship that the organization had with the school, because you easily could have gave more hours, either me or other therapists, by having a one-on-one in school with this kiddo, because kiddo was super bright, did perseverate on certain things, and needed a lot of breaks, but still followed directions as needed, just needed breaks. Like this kiddo just needed breaks. I felt like just a lot of little breaks in between asking tasks of him. So I just felt like, I'm listening to the way that y'all are talking about him, and I'm hearing all of these reports, and I'm reading through case notes after case notes, and I'm like, they do this same thing to Black kids. So I asked my supervisor, why don't we have any Black kids on our caseload? Like, what's going on? And she's like, well, Black children don't really get diagnosed like that. Their parents don't really bring them in. Their parents don't really like to hear that there's something going on and that their child needs more assistance, which I could validate at the time, because yes, that is the truth about our community, but there's so many other layers to it. Because like I said in my video, it all boils down to racism and, and white supremacy. So in this article by NPR, it starts with a mom saying that about 9 months old, she noticed that her son was just something was going on, and the teacher, or not the teacher, the pediatrician was just like, oh, well, boys just develop slower than girls. Not a thing. That's not a thing. Please stop telling parents that, because then what happens is when a boy develops at the exact same pace as a girl, he's seen as more advanced. And then when a girl progresses at whatever pace that is deemed appropriate for boys, because boys develop slower than girls, then she's also treated in a certain way. So like, let's not do that. Let's not talk about the acceleration in which children develop, because it's already too much of a requirement to be born in this world anyway. Let's not. It's bad enough for doing gender. Let's not. So mom says at 2 years old, she's getting desperate. 2 and a half. Her son was referred to Children's Hospital of LA, and after 4 hours, um, the mom was given a 20-page report, and her child was for sure diagnosed with autism. So while this was like a lucky thing, like a great thing that happened, mom was able to get a diagnosis for her son at 2 and a half. That's not normally what happens in our community. They say that, let me look at the actual percentage. They did a study at McGill University in Montreal, and they actually found that doctors were more hesitant to diagnose autism spectrum disorder in Black and brown families. Like, and while I know we say the parents aren't doing the work, what about when the parents are? I know that it's easy to dismiss parent because again, so many of us have experienced so much trauma from our parents that we can be like, well, parents are just dismissive. Yes. Yes, parents are and can be dismissive. I'm not going to invalidate anyone's traumatic parents, but at the same time, doctors be dismissive too. In 2007, a study by a team at the Center for Autism and Developmental Disabilities Research and Etymology at the University of Pennsylvania found that African American children were 5.1 times more likely to be misdiagnosed with conduct disorders before actually being diagnosed with ASD. Which brings me to the comment section of the video that I post, where there were so many comments of like Black children being diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, which is funny because now that I say it out loud, like to y'all, I was working at an organization and I remember getting multiple cases of all diverse, like it was a very diverse caseload. I had white clients, Black clients, Latino clients, I had Samoan clients, I had a very diverse caseload. But most, if not all, of my Black clients were diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. It's so funny. And I remember I kept seeing it over and over and over and over. And I remember asking my supervisor at that time, which is so autistic, by the way. It's so autistic to see the patterns. It's like the way that, anyway, so it was one particular case. I can't remember who this kiddo was, but it was like, I knew it was a Black girl. And in the list of like diagnoses was ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. And I was like, okay, we get a lot of these, we get a lot of this from Black girls. Like, what are we? And so I, because she was a clinician, I said, I need you to explain to me, what is ODD? What am I misunderstanding about this defiance disorder? And the way she just so like blase was like, oh, well, you know how you kind of, you ask a kiddo to do something and they're just giving you kind of a tough time. And I'm like, you mean every child on the planet? Every single human child giving you a hard time? Giving you a hard, apparently, a child, especially a Black child, especially a Black girl, giving an adult a hard time could get them the diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder, which leads to a whole other list. It's a whole other world of mental health than autism spectrum disorder treatment. The way that children with ODD are treated is not even in a million years how the mental health field would treat children with autism. Ever. Ever. Not at all. So there's a layer of discrimination that's happening with these children who are encountering biased counselors, biased teachers, biased doctors, biased psychiatrists. They're experiencing so many different layers of bias everywhere they go. And this is the privilege of knowing that they're experiencing these biases. Because, like I experienced with this organization where I'm wondering where all my Black clients is, you're lucky if your Black child is getting ASD services anyway. Because they could have been diagnosed with ODD and just been somewhere else, not getting the services they need, being treated like a troublemaker, like a problem child, getting detention instead of counseling, real counseling, getting suspended from school instead of getting a one-on-one, getting expelled from the district instead of getting supportive services that lead them to healthy lifestyles. It's unbelievable how obvious the disparities are and how quiet a lot of community members are about it. But not to say that community members are not speaking up, because there's obviously all of this proof about it. However, I feel like a lot of the organizations that receive the most funding to serve these type of communities are not serving these type of communities. And that's my issue. That has always been my issue. Every single time we get into talking about this nonprofit industrial complex, that is always my issue. It is that the organizations that are getting the money are not doing the work. And it's a problem for me. And it's a problem for the community. And it's a problem for the kids in the community who are suffering without support. They grow up not having the support they need. Their parents here. And it's also in the Black community, Black parents struggle with accepting or understanding that your child being diagnosed with either ADHD or autism does not mean your child their life is over. What that means is the opportunity to support your child in order for them to thrive becomes really obvious. You have a chance to now, if you don't know what's happening, now you have a chance to ask questions. And the best person to ask outside of a clinician is the child. It's building a relationship with that child, even a nonverbal child. You can build a relationship with and a communication style where you can build a bond to build support for this child. It's an absolute thing. We see it happening on Instagram. We see it with Living with Lilac. We see it with Stacy, Stece. We see Stacy on TikTok. Like, these are kiddos. There's even a kiddo named Dominic who has an Instagram. I haven't had a chance to follow them because someone harassed me in my comments. Dominic, if your family's watching, I will follow you. Someone was harassing me and was using your name as like a harassment tool to be like, there are Black children with autism. And I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm asking, where are the Black children on the client list? And they use your name as like some kind of bait tool. So I'm very sorry to the family of Dominic that happened, but I will follow you because, again, there are ways to build communication with nonverbal children with autism, just like Living with Lilac. And I feel like Black parents are not given the grace to build those bonds. Black parents are not given the privilege to build those bonds. And even more so, historically, disabled children were killed. So there's already a trauma for disabled children in the world. And even if we think of like, oh, my heart breaks. We think of the amount of parents who have children with autism, they have no idea what to do. And their answer is, there's nothing wrong with my child. That's a super heartbreaking one because that's the one you hear the most often. And there's nothing wrong with people with autism. There's nothing wrong with children with autism. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with any of us. Like, there's nothing wrong with us, whether or not we have a diagnosis just means that that's how we navigate through life. That's the support that we need to be successful. And there's nothing wrong with knowing that you need extra tools to be successful. There's nothing wrong with that. All right. Let me make sure I caught everything on my notes real quick. Oh, you know what? I wasn't even in the restream. I'm sorry, y'all. I've been talking at this camera this whole time and didn't even hit the chat. Thanks. Okay, so let's see. Let me go to my notes. Let me give y'all some music since it's super quiet. All right. So we talked about ways that I discovered fantastic at masking. Oh, okay. So another thing that they didn't talk about in this article was black and white thinking and literal thinking. So with black and white thinking and literal thinking, I'll read the actual I'll give you the actual definition. Okay. So here we go. Black and white, also known as polarized thinking patterns, are ways of thinking that just make sense to people with autism. Individuals on the spectrum struggle with the nuances and nonverbal gestures and communication that exist in interpersonal interactions and communication standards that may come more naturally to others. For example, anything lower than 100% on a math quiz, failure. And that's even if the actual grade earned is 97%. Handling conflicts is a tough one to begin with, but for someone with ASD, an argument or lack of agreement about a topic equals no more friendship. So a young woman with ASD may get in an argument with a friend at school and immediately feel they are not friends with this person anymore, struggling to understand that disagreements are a natural part of any relationship and can be worked through. These automatic thoughts can lead to significant setbacks in a child's academic and social functioning. So that was another way that I knew, like, yeah, super black and white thinker. If you've heard someone say, wow, you take things really literally, but they're not saying it in a complimentary way, that's another way to know that you might have a little bit of some black and white thinking. Let's see, what's another one that I put on my list? I do not know why my laptop keeps trying to adjust this brightness. Girl, this is up to me. Oh, another thing that people with autism always say before they get diagnosed, see me in the sun, we're fighting. Another thing that people say before they get diagnosed with autism is, I feel like everyone has a manual. I feel like everyone has a manual and like they know what they're doing more than I am. Everyone has instructions on how to exist. They know how to adult for some reason. Like, or like I was saying earlier, people like not understanding womanhood, girls knowing how to woman, feeling like girls know how to woman better than I do. And I'm like, who the fuck is teaching y'all this? Like, how do you know? You know? Another thing is like how long it took me to like not self-actualize as much as it was like to identify the things about myself that I didn't notice. Like, so one thing, this is a random thing, right? So before everyone started doing baby hairs, like I didn't even think about them at all. Hadn't thought about them, didn't think about them. But when they started doing baby hairs, it unlocked a memory from my childhood where I remember seeing girls with baby hairs and being like, what's that? Not in that I wanted it, just being like, why does your hair do that? Like, how, why and how does hair do that? And just leaving the thought at that. Like, it's just little things where I felt like, do people have different instructions on how to live? And I just missed a certain meeting or something. And then another one was misunderstanding social situations, like being like, "Hey, yo," or walking away from a social situation feeling guilty but not knowing why. Being like, okay, what did I do wrong? Did I say anything wrong? Did I say anything weird? Like, was I overly awkward? You know what I mean? Because especially if I'm at a place where I'm unmasked, I'm like, ooh, was I uncomfortable? Did I make anybody else uncomfortable? Stuff like that. It's, you know, because masking, I'm always at my best, doing my best. But when I'm myself, I realize I am also always doing my best unmasked. So there's no reason to do that. Okay, so some last little tidbits before we wrap up, because I already talked about, if you want me to go into more detail, which I've done on my TikTok, um, because again, we've already talked about like counselor bias and we talked about white supremacy and how that impacts like diagnosis in Black children. Classism plays a huge role because, like I said, I had to transfer from one office to a more in a more like diverse neighborhood, I guess you'd say, in order to even experience a more diverse caseload. And when I transferred over there, didn't have as great supplies or as great support, so it was even harder at that other office. That's classism. And then we talked about racism. So I covered all of the reasons why Black children go underdiagnosed. I've also left lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of links that you all can access if you have any other questions about the stuff that I'm talking about. But last two things. So, one, people can have, like I said earlier, autism and ADHD and PTSD and an onslaught of many diagnoses, but that doesn't mean that one invalidates the other. That's not what that means. Because someone has ADHD doesn't mean they don't have PTSD. Because someone has PTSD does not mean they don't have autism. Like, all things can be true. And I do believe that more, because again, another trait of autism is easily, experiencing being easily manipulated, and a lot of sexual violence happens to autistic people from being manipulated in the community. So this all plays a role. The trauma of being manipulated because you're autistic can lead to PTSD, which can lead to ADHD. So like, it's all connected. And then autism can look different in Black people. We have to take into consideration that generational trauma that Black people have experienced in order to understand that masking is different. For instance, like Black mothers encourage their children, like we all make the joke, like, don't touch shit when you go into the store. Well, like, one, all children touch things and ask for things when they go into the store. That's not just a Black kid thing at all. But when you're autistic and Black, sometimes you have to touch stuff. Like, sometimes you have to touch it. I don't know how to explain that. And this isn't in a sexual way. Sometimes as an autistic child, if I've gone to a grocery store, or even another one, like if I go into a shoe store, sometimes I used to have to touch the tissue inside the shoe. That was a thing when I was a kid. Like, I had to touch the tissue inside the shoe. Like, I don't know why I didn't get diagnosed earlier. I did a whole bunch of things as a kid where it was like, but because Black parenting styles requires an additional layer of like masking from their kids, autistic children tend to experience meltdowns, tantrums, or aversions to shopping altogether. I remember when I was a kid, going into the mall would send me into a full sweat, just because it was like the stores, it was like you went into a building, so that was already uncomfortable for me. And then inside the building were smaller rooms, and each of the rooms had different temperatures. So one room would have air conditioning and the other one wouldn't. And if I had to go through two different temperatures, my body's like, ah! Or if I had to try on clothes, oh, kill me now. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. And my mom and my sister would get so irritated if I had to go to the store with them. But it's little things like that that really stuck out for me in my experience, that really played a role in, as when I became an adult and responsible for myself, realizing, there are some areas where I cannot just do this on the fly. I can't mask my way through these situations. I need real life support. So thank y'all for listening. It was a great hour chatting with y'all. Click the links in the description if you have any questions. And I appreciate y'all support. And yeah, maybe I'll do another one of these later. Or not. No, I'll do another one.